Hello everybody. As I was reading through the story of Estado da India or Portuguese India, I came across very interesting material on how the modern Europeans who arrived in the Indian Malabar coast via the Oceanic routes found themselves totally unaware of the Indian culture and customs. I found this material very fascinating and I thought I'll share it with all of you. In the last several years, when new hires join the European or American multinationals, or when a technology service provider sends someone on site, they go through a cultural immersion. Depending on the role, they cover a lot of stuff in the immersion training, right from rolling the R so that one can speak in a horribly fake American accent, to watching Friends and picking up some outdated lingo. It's actually a very fun exercise to watch. I once actually had a friend at college who kept listening to Michael Jackson all night so that he can familiarize himself with the US English. I wonder what he's up to now. In any case, regardless of if one had any sort of cultural immersion, most of them who land in a foreign country do go through a bit of a culture shock. It takes a little bit to settle down. Welcome to Masala History by Siva. In today's edition, we will travel back in time when Vasco da Gama landed his fleet for the first time at southwest India. I should thank both modern-day historians like Manu S. Pillai and older-day chroniclers like Figueroa and Gaspar Correa for giving such amazing insights of this day. Also, while we are at it, if you love Indian military history, then do not miss the podcast series called The Yuddha, presented by Anirudh and Aditya Ramanathan. Their latest season on Deccan's violent military history is brilliant. Anyway, so let's sit on our time machines, buckle up and set the dial to 1498, heading straight to Kozhikode in Kerala. The world prepared itself for a massive change when the caravel was invented. Bartholomew Dias sailed around the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. His voyage showed that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans flowed into each other. The Portugal King Manuel was enthused and commissioned Vasco da Gama to go in search of a sea route to India. He provided a bunch of convicts and workers, about 170 in all, from his prisons to travel with da Gama, as they were disposable without regret. Deep inside, Manuel was almost certain that the first trip would anyway be a disaster. On July 8, 1497, Vasco da Gama began his voyage from Portugal with 4 vessels. Vasco da Gama himself rowed in the 200-ton Saint Gabriel, and his younger brother Paulo da Gama led the Saint Raphael. Bartholomew Dias was the major inspiration and coach and personally navigated the fleet for the first few hundred miles. After circling the African coast, Vasco da Gama's fleet arrived at the port of Melindi on April 14, 1498. Here, he met a Gujarati pilot who knew the route to Calicut on the southwest coast of India and took him aboard. After sailing across Arabian Sea, finally on 14th May 1498, the fleet reached Malabar coast. To be safe from any surprises, one of his motley crew was selected to swim ashore and sense the mood of the natives there before the captain could make a triumphant entrance. And thus, ironically, the first modern European to sail all the way from the west and set foot on Indian soil was a petty criminal from the prisons of Lisbon. Now let's understand how the Portuguese understood India and Indians. The Europeans strongly believed with most solemn conviction that the biblical Garden of Eden was located in the east of India, and that there thrived all sorts of absurdly exotic creatures like unicorns and snake-headed humans and all that. India was also supposedly filled with palaces of gold that sparkled in bright sun, and gems were to be found everywhere. But perhaps the most interesting assumption was that India was actually an ancient nation of Christians ruled by a sovereign whose name was Prester John. Readers of Masala History's Facebook blog might remember our full story on Prester John that we recorded a few months back. If Vasco da Gama and his men anticipated the legendary Prester John as they stepped on to the shores of Kerala in India, they were disappointed and confused. For when the envoys of the local king arrived, they came bearing summons from Manavikrama, a Hindu Raja, famed across the trading world as the Samudri Raja. Samudra means the ocean, and Samudri Raja stood for the king of ocean. The Europeans anglicized Samudri Raja to Zamarin, a name that is more commonly used, ironically, even in India today. Anyway, once they anchored in Calicut, Da Gama and his retinue were taken to a Hindu temple, which they assumed to be a large church. They assumed the Hindu god's idol in the Sanctum Sanctorum to represent the Virgin Mary. In fact, it was a Shivalinga, and they thought that the Virgin Mary's picture or portrait was possibly hidden by the Shivalinga. In this temple, or church according to them, Vasco da Gama said his prayers kneeling down in a typical Catholic style. They were, however, perplexed that only some select people who wore threads around their shoulders, i.e. Brahmins, could enter the Sanctum Sanctorum. When the priest gave them holy ash, or vibhuti as we call it, the Europeans assumed that it was the custom of Indian Christians to put it on their foreheads, chests, around the neck and forearms, and all these guys also did the same. The Portuguese also assumed that the paintings on the temple walls of gods were actually angels wearing crowns, although some of them were wondering, why did these angels have 4+ arms and teeth protruding out? The fun thing was that Vasco da Gama and his team were actually taken to 2 different Hindu temples before they could finally reach the Zamarin's place. It was hilarious because in the second temple, they automatically took the holy ash or vibhuti and put it all over their head and upper body. Vasco da Gama received one courtesy audience from the Zamarin, and they were greatly impressed by the sheer opulence of his court. But when Vasco da Gama requested an official business discussion, he was informed of the local custom of furnishing presents to the ruler first. He confidently produced 12 pieces of striped cloth, 4 scarlet hood, 6 hats, 4 strings of coral, a case of 6 wash hand basins, a case of sugar, 2 casks of oil, and 2 of honey for submission. Samudri Raja Manivikrama's men burst out laughing, pointing out that even the poorest Arab merchants knew that nothing less than pure gold was admissible at this court, and this was all nothing but junk to them. Vasco da Gama was a shrewd man. He tried to make up for the embarrassment by projecting himself as an ambassador of Portugal and not a mere merchant. He is supposed to have told the king Manivikrama, "Sire, you are powerful and very great above all the kings and rulers of India, and all of them are under your feet. My sovereign, the great king of Portugal, having heard of your grandeur, and it is spoken of throughout the world, has a great longing to become acquainted with you and to contract friendship with you as a brother of his own, and with full and sincere peace and amity to send his ships with much merchandise to trade and buy your merchandise. And above all, pepper and drugs, of which there is none in Portugal. And with this desire, he sent 50 ships, with me as the captain major. He sent me to go on shore with his present and message of love and friendship, which I have presented to you. God has been pleased to bring me here where I am, and I tell you, sire, that so powerful is my sovereign, the King of Portugal, that after I have returned to him with your reply, and with the cargo which you will give me, he will send many fleets and merchandise, and they will carry away as many goods as they can be had from the city. To certify the truth of what I say, here is a letter of the king, my sovereign, King Manuel, signed with his hand and seal, and in it you will see his good and true words which he says to you." End quote. Vasco da Gama then kissed this letter, placed it upon his eyes and then upon his head, and gave it to King Manivikrama with his knee on the ground. The king took the letter, placed it on his chest with both hands, showing marks of friendship, opened it, looked at it, and then gave it to the overseer of the treasury, telling him to get it translated. Of course, Vasco da Gama was adding colorful lies to make himself appear more important. But the king's aides weren't convinced. They bluntly told the Portuguese sailor that if this so-called mighty king of Portugal could afford only third-rate trinkets and junks as presents, the mighty Zamorin or Samudri Raja had no interest whatever in initiating any diplomatic dealings on the basis of equality with him. Manivikrama, it was obvious, could not care less about an obscure king Manuel in an even more obscure kingdom called Portugal, and he brushed aside Da Gama's lofty ambassadorial claims. The hostility of Arab merchants in Kerala or Kozhikode did not help the Portuguese either, for the Arab merchants initiated a policy of slander, painting the Portuguese sailors as untrustworthy pirates. When the Portuguese complained to Samudri Raja, they were shrugged off. The first European trade mission, thus, was a big flop as far as the Indians were concerned. It is another thing that Vasco da Gama will get a hero's welcome back in Portugal. In addition to making a 400% profit, he also smartly smuggled a few Indian workers from Kozhikode back to Portugal, and they helped educate the subsequent travelers better about India, or hopefully the truth about India. Vasco da Gama himself would return back to India twice again, the last time as Viceroy of Estado da India, with vengeance, and would unleash his fury massacring several thousand civilians. And all because he failed to study and understand the culture of the country that he was so hard trying to find out. That is the end of today's story. Hope you had fun listening to the interesting cultural clash of the medieval Europeans with India. I will see you with yet another Masala history very soon. Take care and goodbye.